Okay, there it is. Okay, amazing. All right. Welcome everyone to our training today, aligning advertising to your go-to-market strategy. For those who don't know me, my name is Charlene. I'm the founder and CEO of the agency. Today's training series or training topic is really part of our larger scale series. It's our five-part training series designed to help you scale profitably and really turn paid acquisition into a growth lever. This training is not about how to set up ads. We just don't simply have that time. This training really is more about the fundamentals for you to hit certain milestones within your business predictably, right? And so, working with so many companies, or just, a quick background for me, having worked at Google and hundreds of companies, lead generation, B2B, all that stuff, you can imagine I've had a lot of conversations around this. And then now, just by the sheer of like what we do, which is digital marketing advertising. When we do talk to people, when they come to us, they are literally coming to us for ads, right? They need help with, we need help with ads, we need help with Google or Meta or whatever. And so the challenge with that is if you start with ads without knowing your business, there's no alignment in terms of like what you're trying to, hit. And so in many conversations that we do have with, hey, Kalia, um,
Hello.
hi. Many of the conversations that we do have with our clients, you'd be astonished in terms of like when we do ask them, like, what are your growth goals? What are you trying to hit? Like, what do you want advertising to do for your business? They're kind of stuck in that stage. And so today's training really is helping you all map out what that looks like through all the stages, from, setting growth targets to what that looks like to actually setting up the conversion architecture, i.e., your goals for advertising. So excited to dive in and thanks for joining us. If you have any questions, just pop in the chat and then I will address them. Cool. So moving into here. So just to paint the picture, this is like our largest scale method. So five-part training system designed to answer each question at each step. So going through the strategy, customer economics, and everything down. So first thing, which is where we are today, is really like what are we trying to achieve, right? What are the growth targets? So everything we're going to talk about today is in bucket one. Future trainings, we get deeper into this, but customer economics is not just who you're targeting, but how much you should actually be spending to acquire the certain people that you're trying to get. Acquisition is the what and the where and what of advertising. So which channels, Google, Meta, whatever, and then what the ads actually look like. Learning loops is more about like the KPIs and what success looks like. If you're doing brand or performance, like aligning all of that and also team alignment, so marketing and sales. And then finally is expansion, which is pretty self-explanatory, but this is like, cool, now that we're running a lot of ads, like where do we scale? How do we look at this? Like what makes sense to actually start scaling full funnel cross-channel? And yeah, so today really is honing on the first piece. Okay, so again, talking about foundations today, the whole question we're trying to answer is like, what kind of growth are we trying to achieve, right? What are the growth goals for the business? And so for today, this is all in part one, but these are the five steps that we'll take you through in terms of helping you answer that. So the first one really is growth planning, so setting growth targets. The second is aligning to your business's go-to-market motion. Third is understanding your ICP or ideal customer profile is what we typically call it. And then the fourth is like the meat of today, which is really mapping your customer journey. So once you've aligned the go-to-market, like what does the sales flow look like? All of that to then map into the conversion architecture, which is your goals for your ad campaigns. So all of this, by the end of that, you'll be able to actually understand what should our advertising actually optimize to hit growth targets. Make sense? Cool. So digging into the first one, this is where we start with everyone. When you think about your business, this should be like the first question that you have that you're thinking through, which is what are your growth targets for the next 6 to 12 months? And so a couple examples, in talking to hundreds of companies. These might change, but really like the theme is pretty much the same across all. But just as an example, is it a revenue top line? So are you trying to go from 5 million to 15 million in annual recurring revenue? So trying to do 3x in the next 6 months. That is a great top line goal to get everyone aligned, right? But from a marketing perspective, sometimes you then have to translate that into customers or pipeline if you're in demand gen. So an example for customers is like, okay, so if you have 100 customers today, like what are you trying to do? Are you trying to double that? And so this, by understanding these, top line things, it's a lot easier for all the teams, not just marketing, but all the teams to then align on marketing and sales to drive top line growth and eventually bottom line growth. And then some questions to help you guys think through is if, for example, customers is like a growth target that we're trying to go after with the advertising strategies, then you can start to think about like, where are we getting customers today, right? Is it organic? Is it Google? And what percentage, right? Is mostly driven by organic, mostly driven by outbound. If it is paid, like Meta, Google, LinkedIn, like what are the channels? Um, and then that way you can start to plan towards the growth goals that you're trying to get. And so if you do need a 3x revenue in the next 6 to 12 months, like what would need to happen to actually hit that? Or what do you need to do more of? So if you're not doing pay today or you're only doing a little bit of pay today, do we want to increase that so that you can actually have some fuel to accelerate growth? Does that all make sense? Amazing. Okay. Um, Moving on to the fun stuff here. So the go-to-market. This is a very like B2B or VC-esque kind of term, but really the language is the same for every business or most businesses. And so when we say like, or when we ask, what is your growth motion? Typically this means like, how do you make money, right? Does someone talk to a salesperson to then close the deal, as in sales-led growth? Or is your business more of like a B2B SaaS where it's like a software or product that you have that people are trying? So they are trying to, start a trial and then eventually use and buy your product, right? And so in our experience, this is really like the two main motions, and especially in VCs, which I work a lot very closely with, this is a very common terminology, and probably 99% of like the conversations that we have are you SLG or PLG? And so just to lay down a layer deeper, because I think conceptually this makes sense, but when people are trying to map that into marketing or advertising, the technicalities here gets lost, right? It's like, yeah, obviously we're sales led, but then when you're trying to drive stuff, they don't really know what they're actually driving. So just here is some examples. And for those of you at home later that are going through this exercise, think about your business, and I want you to actually think about like, what are you trying to drive more of, right, to hit your revenue goals. So, examples. If you're sales ed or you have a sales team, very common things here, you're driving phone calls, right? People call so that they want to talk to a person. Typically, there might be a process, so they might go to your website, fill out a lead form. More common now with AI, chat leads, and then also very common in B2B, you're trying to book a demo. Okay. On the product-led side, which is more B2B SaaS or any kind of consumer brand, very common is someone goes to your website, starts a trial, and then they fill out a form, they complete the trial, sign up. And then oftentimes they will use the product a couple of times, and there's different actions within the product that you can signal as, oh, this is a person that is likely to sign on with this as a customer. I'm part of Stage 2 Capital with Mark Roberge, and he talks a lot about in the growth journey for a startup, there's 3 phases. There's product market fit, go to market fit, which is what we're talking about, and then growth and scale. But in product market fit, it's all about like, what are your leading, we call it LIR, leading indicators of retention, meaning in the early days or months of, someone using your product, what are they doing that would signal them retaining, right, as a retained customer. If you're like HubSpot, are they actually using certain features a lot more that indicate, okay, cool, this person's probably going to stay on. So that's really important in advertising too, because that will indicate later what, like, if someone's going to sign on as a customer. And then the last one, pretty common sense, but sales, right? That's a pretty, if you're e-commerce too, as an example, someone goes to your website, boom, it's a sales, right? Like that's pretty direct. And so when we think about these different growth motions, like at the agency, we're performance driven, so we're all about math here. And it's aligned to a lot of the stuff that we do in VCs, where a lot of the economics have to make sense. So as we're planning for these growth motions, if you're sales led, then we look at sales capacity. What does that mean, right? How many people on your sales team? For the people on your sales team, what does your sales capacity look like, right? What percentage of their day is spent outbound versus inbound, right? Taking leads from maybe paid or good organic, like inbound. And so if you have I talked about this in previous trainings, but 5-person sales team, they can take 6 calls a day. That's 30 calls a week times five. Then you can start to map out how many leads you really want to drive towards the business. Doesn't have to be perfect again, but that way, when we're spending money on ads, then we actually know what action we're trying to drive here and how many, so that we're also not driving 10,000 leads and then your sales team can't handle. Cool? Does that all make sense? Does anyone want to give me a live example of your business that we can maybe run through? We can do it live.
For example, I am in the business of lawyer,
Okay.
um, and I receive a lot of calls from the people that they find they need a service. So yes, but we have received a lot, and we don't have the enough uh, people to answer that, and they go to and we use the AI. So it's that we work now.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's a lot of different types of leads that are coming in. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes,
Okay, great. And then is the challenge around not knowing, like you guys are getting a lot of leads, but you don't know which ones are converting, and then so you're spending a bunch of money,
yes,
you don't know what's happening?
yes, yes. We spend a lot of money, and we don't know where is coming the lead, and also we don't find the perfect quality
Yep.
with these leads. So yes, we have these. We need to find that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a very great example, very common, right? As we know. And so, um, in the next slide, actually, we're going to go deeper into mapping this out. I actually laid out here on the bottom some questions for those on the line that are catching the recording after too. But, at a high level, you want to think about your growth motion here. Are you SLG or PLG? If you're a mix of both, so if you are driving, free trials and you have a sales team, what percentage of your business is, driven from each? And then if you want to take a step later, you want to think about like who is coming from each, right? So if someone signs up for a trial, is that a same person that talks to a sales team? Typically, when someone talks to a salesperson, if you have both, it's a bigger business, right? Like you're a company versus like an individual. Like, I know you talked about the lawyer example, which I'll get to, but like, um, we work with coaches or training softwares as an example. Kajabi is a great example. They're not as great around right now, but we'll just use them as an example. But you can download Kajabi, start a free trial, or you can talk to a sales team. And so someone downloading a free trial is probably an individual creator versus like a solopreneur versus someone talking to a salesperson is probably a bigger company. Those are two very different types of people coming through two different flows. And so I call this out on the bottom because people don't realize that. And so as you're crafting advertising campaigns or any kind of marketing campaigns, the targeting would be different, the messaging would be different, the cost of a bigger company lead is different. And then here, of these two flows, what are the main actions you're driving in each flow? And Mariana, I think this is what is going to answer you, right? If you do have all these different actions, like what are the main actions that we drive? And so I think that's a perfect segue into mapping the customer lead flow. Can you guys all see this? It's a little small. Okay. And so I know it's a little wordy here, but I'll walk you through. Um, in this example, I'll go here because you mentioned the lawyer with many different phone calls and AI chats and not knowing what. And so for us to understand in lead gen, it's always a balance of volume and quality, right? You want to drive a lot of leads, but then at some point, you don't want 1,000 bad leads, right? You still want leads that are converting. And so it's always a balancing game between volume of leads and then quality. If you go too down funnel to a final closed customer, that might not be that much. You're probably going to get a few, or the volume or data is gonna not going to be as much, right? And so, like, you want to balance between the two. So in your case of a lawyer, someone might go to your website and then they might be able to call, they see a phone number and they call, right? Or they see a chat that they can start to like talk with the chat person and, you know, see if, what the service is. And then from here, I think this is what you're mentioning. So this is an exercise for, again, those that are going through the recording after this. You want to map the funnel here. So step one, someone goes to your website. Step two, for your business, what is that next um, lead stage or qualified lead? One step of qualified lead. So you mentioned phone calls, right?
Yes.
Okay. Oops, you mentioned uh,
Chats.
chat leads, typically very common now with AI. And then there is a lead form, right? So
Yes.
these are all three. And these are pretty much in the same, I put them here because these are pretty much similar qualification step, right? Someone calling in a phone call, someone submitting a lead form. Actually, submitting a lead form could be more of like a qualified stage because they actually took the time and like filled out and selected certain things. Phone calls, you can always do a more engaged phone call if you really wanted to create a mediary step or make this one just more qualified. You can always do um, duration over a minute as an example, right? That signals like maybe it's not like a oopsie call or like, they were just trying to find the address, it's like a little bit more, they were talking and there's been a conversation. And so this is kind of like you know, they took and there's intent. They like are talking. And then step three is maybe like they talk to a salesperson. So SQL is just sales qualified lead. Um, this can, it could be, yeah, like just sales qualified. They talk to a salesperson, the person marks in the CRM, okay, we talked to this person. Seems like a great type of matter or case for us. Like we're gonna put it in there and then make that note. Okay. And then step four is typically like the most valuable stage, which is either a customer or closed one, or maybe for you, it's like a approved case, right? Or paying customer, whatever it is, right? And so this is what we call mapping the flow. And you can see here these colors. Online just means this is online, right? This is done on a website or online. Phone calls should probably be a little bit different, but yeah, it's online. And then this is a CRM, which meaning they talk to a salesperson, information or data is input into the CRM. Why do I call this out? Because oh, I see Christy. Because when we're mapping this flow, why do we want to map this flow in the first place? We want to map these because this is the flow that we're going to align back into Meta, Google, any of the ad platforms. But not only that, um, as a visual, these are going to be conversions. So many times, especially in the lead generation space, if you're not as sophisticated yet, a lot of people just drive lead forms or phone calls or, these kind of higher level upper funnel conversions. But to your point, Mariana, you're like, okay, cool. If I'm spending all this money and um, getting a bunch of these lead forms, but they're just not, they're junk leads or they don't mean anything, it doesn't matter, right? And so as we get more sophisticated, we want to move down funnel to more of like a sales qualified lead, right? Like this is like a good person. Um, Hi, Christy. And then finally, we get into a proof case, which is like the final number. And so I'm going to put some math behind this, right, to help you guys understand this. Um, Knowing what conversions we want in the advertising campaigns is really important. The next question is like, which one do we optimize to? Like in your case, Mariana, you're like, okay, I get a bunch of leads here. Like, if Google or Meta is giving me some great leads, but like how do I make sure I'm getting the right leads? And then if the final customer approved case, I'm just going to say closed one, so it's more generic right now. Um, if it's too little, then I'm not getting enough data to optimize. And so the reason why we have this, and I'll share this with you guys afterwards so that you guys actually have the template, but we have these so that you can start to put some data behind it. Okay. I'm just going to make up some numbers right now. So let's just say 1,000 people go to your website today. Um, how many would you say turn into, how many phone calls do you think you guys get?
Like a 50
50? Okay, so
or
500 phone
yes.
calls. Okay. And then how many of that turns into they talk to a salesperson and it's like a good quality lead?
Mm. 100 or maybe
So
two,
20, maybe 20%.
20%, yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then closed one, maybe it's like another 20, right? This is just numbers, but you can start to visually see like what is the whole lead to sale journey look like. And then next you can just do like, okay, what are the conversion rates, right? Pretty easy. Oopsies. Right. And so now when you have like a baseline, let's just say, for example, these were May numbers. And so, you know, if you, whether you are running advertising campaigns right now or not, like you can start to understand this is the baseline and this is the conversion rate. And so back at step one, when we talked about what are your growth targets, right? If you're trying to go from 5 million to 15 million, you're trying to 3x, like how do we get more revenue? You can either increase the number of leads or you can improve the conversion rates here. Okay. And so if, for example, you were spending, I'm just going to make it up, $10,000 a month on ads, and this is the number that you're getting, and you don't have more budget, then your growth lever options are either improving the quality of leads or improving the conversion, right? Um, and then here, I know this is a little confusing. So that's like ground level, right? Understanding the milestones, the conversions, and then the data. When you look at this, then you can start to be like, okay, if I was running a campaign driving lead forms or a sales qualified lead, now which one can I optimize? A good rule of thumb for advertising across most platforms is 30 conversions or more. That's like one conversion a day. So that gives the algorithm enough data to optimize for. But if this number was too low, for example, right, the closed one is only 20. If you're only setting closed one as the main conversion to optimize, you're not going to get much, right? And if anything, the campaign's um, going to take a while to get a conversion, and then it's either going to like die. I don't want to say die, but like, it's going to slowly, it's just not going to have enough, like these algorithms feed off of data. So it needs data to like improve. And so then you can start to like, you can start to play the game of like volume versus quality, volume versus like, you know, where in the funnel can I start to pick? Um, Once you understand that, the next phase then is moving more into like advanced strategies where you can not only leverage volume, but value. Okay. What do I mean by value? Do you want to take a guess? Anyone here? Mariana, you want to take a stab?
Okay. Maybe no, I don't know how to have place. Maybe the value. I don't know. Um, Conversion value. I think that maybe we have like a 5 with the CRM. I don't know if I explain okay.
Um, so the let's go back to like what could we pass as values? So what are values? So in a B2B example, right? When someone goes to a website, they fill out a form, they talk to a salesperson, and then eventually get closed. When they talk to a salesperson here at this step, maybe it's deal value, right? A common term we use is like, what is your average deal size, deal value? And so, especially in B2B, the reason why this is so important is because anyone could be between, it could be like a 2K deal to a $100,000 B2B deal, right? And so, what you pay for that potential customer, you'd likely be willing to pay a lot more for the 100K whale than like, the person that's only going to come in at like 1 or 2K, right? And so the challenge in like that we see working with a lot of, especially in VC, a lot of people use average deal size, which is hard and it's not as accurate in advertising because like if it was that example of 2K to 100K, if we're talking about average of about like 50K, then first of all, 50K is not enough to pay for the 100K. So you're going to miss out on that super valuable deal. And then 50K, you're overpaying for the low value lead, right? And so we
Yes.
want to start to understand and put data behind all this so you can actually get very surgical in terms of like who you're actually willing to pay for. And so again, this is more just a planning exercise. So imagine this is 10K to, let's just say 150K is a common, deal value. When the salesperson talks in, they'll probably put like, oh, cool, high value lead, 75K contract deal. And then when they actually get closed, this might be a week or a couple weeks later, whatever the sales time is, then you can actually put in the final, let's just say ended, cool, we closed at 70K. And so the reason why this is important is because everything in any ad platform, there's volume and value strategies. And so when you start to like bring in these conversions, imagine if you're bringing the SQL conversion data into Google Ads as an example, then not only will you know that there's 100 SQLs, you'll know which ones were worth 2,000 and which ones were worth 150,000 because you can also assign that value back. And then when you switch your bid strategy, which we'll get more into the A piece of our framework, which is the acquisition and ads piece, then you start to know like, okay, we can now use a value bidding strategy like TROAS as an example to then, like bid by value, like give me the higher value people. And then does that all make sense?
Yes, totally.
Cool. And then the last call out here is just the time between each step. This is also important too. More common in B2B. If you're e-commerce or consumer, not as big of a deal because things happen right away, right? People go to your website, they purchase. But in B2B, as an example, sometimes when they talk to a salesperson, a deal might take a while. And so if this is, I don't know, 120 days as an example, this might be something that's a little bit too down funnel for us to be optimizing for, right? we could still be tracking it and getting that data into Google, Meta, whatever, right? To see like, okay, cool, all the money we're spending to get steps 1 through 3 or 4, we at least know what's converting. We can match it back into our CRM. But if it's gonna take 120 days for us to even know that signal, that's way too long. Like, we don't like what are we gonna do in beforehand, right? We need a more recent signal. Good rule of thumb is anything over 90 days it's too like the algorithm can't take it. So that's just, it's too far out. Good rule of thumb is anything within 2 weeks, I think is recent enough for us to like use, right, for the quality signals. Um, so that's the flow. Um, for those of you who will be catching the recording after this, we've laid out the steps here. You can follow it so that you can map this flow for your business. And then this is the last call out that I'll have. This exercise you're going to want to do for each sales motion. So earlier we talked about the different motions, right? Um, PLG, SLG, and then you also want to do for different segments because these might differ. So if you have like um, I don't know if I have a good example, uh, like, I don't know if you're in construction versus someone else, like the sales cycle for a particular customer might be a lot shorter or longer. And so this, impacts that data significantly. You want to map it out. We have this as an example for PLG. This is actually a client that we're working with right now. This is actually how it looks like. And you'll be surprised, very common across hundreds of companies, probably the same actions. If, sign up, if you're doing trials, it's a sign up start, the sign up complete, and then they do something in your product that signals quality consumer that might sign up. And then they're like a closed customer, right? Then we get into LTV, then we get to a lot more stuff, but this is like the same basic flow. Good. Um, great. The last one here, in terms of the tactical stuff for mapping the flow is uh, actually going to your website. And so this is more just like, how do we actually bring this to life? Right. This is like conceptual, makes sense from a data perspective. Now that we want to bring this to life, what do each step look like? So for example, here, you just literally go into your website and then you just go through the flow. We make all of our clients do this. So for you guys on the recording doing this, make sure you go to your website and just literally go through the flow. You go to your homepage, maybe you go through a trial flow. I'll use nickel as an example, right? Very common for many companies. You either start a free trial or you book a demo. This is PLG, this is SLG. And then you just go through the flow, right? And so for your business, go through the flow, and then think from the consumer perspective, what's happening? Are they starting the free trial? Are they now signing up to create an account? Are they selecting certain fields in a lead form? Um, Basically every single thing until you get towards a completed step, right? And then here is more like in product, this is what happens. And then these are like, you start to map the conversions. Why is this important? Because as you start to map this back into your ad campaigns, this is all stuff that we want to track. We talked about online and CRM here. This is online conversions and offline conversions. Again, we'll get into this so much more in the A piece of our framework, which is the acquisition and ads, the where and what. But based on this, you know what to track. And so, for example, right, you have the actual URL so that your developers or anyone or ours, if you're working with us, know what to track. This is online conversion. Anything here is an offline conversion. And then you start to map out like what the name is and then volume, and then if you guys have value. I've added here as an example of when you are going through the flow, things to think about. For like a qualified user. I'll get a little bit into this in my deck. But this is a great example of like as you're thinking about, you know, you're driving leads to your website or business, which leads do you want to prioritize? Which leads do you want to, you're willing to spend more in that 2 to 100K example? You can tell, right? Often based on what people select. So many cases, if you think about like um, who your ICP is, your ideal customer profile, who do you want more of? And so like or like who what would increase ACV, average customer value? Is it based on their company size? Is it based on their annual revenue? Is it based on vertical? Is it based on number of users, right? You'll start to get a lot of signals early on. You don't have to wait all the way till this last step 90 days later, right? You can get early signals here from a lead form that help indicate whether someone is higher value versus another, right? Okay. And I know we're almost at time, so I'll just run through the last piece really quickly. So this is the last piece of the ICP, right? So kind of that lead form that I was just showing, right? If we're looking at the 5K to 100K buyer, like who are the core ICPs? Which ones are higher or lower value? What's a typical deal size range by ICP? And then as you're mapping the strategies, right? Think about like who do you want more of? What is the ideal mix, right? Volume versus quantity, same thing. And then finally, like what increases ACV? This is what I'm referring to for the lead form. Like if it's not, if there's certain things that increase it, like we talked about, revenue, company size, category, industry, whatever it is, number of users, uh, you can put that on your lead form if you have one to then qualify. If someone doesn't hit the revenue number that you service, boom, you don't have to, like, you can tell Google, Meta, whoever, those are not the right leads, deprioritize. So you can start to add these signals. Finally, we talked about all of this planning is to align towards the conversion architecture. We start with conversions because that is the goal of the campaign. A lot of people, as I mentioned earlier on, come to us because they want to do ads. Makes sense because we do ads in marketing. But, if you're asking, what are how do we improve targeting? How do we do the right keywords? How do we get the right audiences? It doesn't matter if we don't have the right conversions because the campaign goal in any ad platform is like the conversion, right? What are you trying to get? Are you trying to get demos? Are you trying to get trials? Are you trying to get a qualified lead? Are you trying to get a phone call or a closed one, right? The conversion is literally the goal of any advertising strategy, which is why in our number one, one phase of our 5-step framework is always mapping all of this to get the conversion goals. And so I just screenshotted here. This is just an example. All the stuff that we walk through, once you understand the flow that we just walked through, this is an example of like what it looks like mapped back into, this is Google, but it'd be the same for Meta or anything else, right? You get the lead, you get the opportunity stage, approved, then funded. Most people, 90, maybe 80% of the people that I've talked to, they only really make it here. Website views, maybe leads, and then they talk about cost per lead, and then they wonder why they're not getting good results. And then when the board asks them questions, they don't know how to like go further, right? So then you want to get into like what is an opportunity? This is where you can probably do like the 2K versus 100K, right? It's a good opportunity, and then approved and funded. Boom. You have the full architecture, and then you know exactly who to optimize for. Cool.